I'm Pam, and I would like to welcome you to the Live Authentically show. My team and I help other people step into their authentic realities, and we do this a number of different ways. This show is obviously one of them. We also have a Facebook group committed to spiritual growth and transformation, and you can find us at liveauthentically.today/FB. Also, check out my debut book, SOAR, SOAR. It's on Amazon, and it's a spiritual experiential journey through a transformative event in my life and shows how I partnered with the universe to create my new reality. So we have a great show planned for you guys today. We have Brian Ondrako with us today. Hey, Brian.
Pamela, grateful to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you so much for taking time to be on my show. So Brian empowers people to just get started by helping them navigate a path to happiness. So lots of awesome stuff to talk about there. But before we do that, I would like to start the show off with the same question that I ask all of my guests. And that is, how do you live authentically every day?
And Pamela, again, thanks for having me. Yeah, this is always a great kind of conversation starter to figure out, where we're at today versus where we came from. I think one of the things to mention, and if I go down a rabbit hole, let me know, but living authentically today probably is way different than what it was 5 or 10 or 15 years ago. So I think part of it is the journey to how I got to this point in that discovery. And for me, it's really understanding who I was or who I am from where I was. So living authentically for me is really understanding that, hey, I'm different than maybe you or the next person, or, I don't have to be, I kind of grew up in this world. I don't mind saying my age. I'm 38. So I'm an older millennial, and kind of growing up in the 90s, early 2000s, kind of the mentality I was brought up with was you have to be in line, get in line with society. You have to, the whole Steve Jobs, quote of like, don't bang into too many walls. And I had this vision of like, okay, if I just don't break out of the norm and just kind of do what everyone else is doing, I'll be okay. I'll be happy. And what I realized was that's not true. So living authentically for me today is just accepting that, listen, I'm different. I have different thoughts and feelings, and the way I am, whether it's, like doing my podcast or writing or stuff like that, it may be different than the norm and what my friends do. And that's okay. So just accepting that. And for me, one of the big things is living by my ethics and morals, honesty, integrity, treating people right. And I learned a lot of this from my grandparents growing up, and we could chat about that more, but like just all of those different kind of ethical things of being good to the world. And I think the world will be better to me. That's kind of how I live authentically. So a little all over the place, I know, to start, but that's kind of how I think about it, at least kind of my stream of consciousness.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
And so now that you are living in this authentic place that is true to who you are, can you compare how you feel in this space as compared to how you used to feel when you weren't living in that authentic place and feeling like you needed to live a life that satisfied other people's ideas for you?
Well, it's almost like, I was trying to break out of this jail or this box, and I didn't know how. So like I felt trapped of like, I wasn't happy, for lack of a better phrase. I had spurts of happiness. I'm not saying I was like depressed the whole time, but you had spurts of happiness. But it was like I wanted to do something greater. I thought I could impact the world in a different way. I just didn't know how. And so I was kind of, I don't know if that visual helps everyone. It's like I felt like I was in a box, like I was in almost a jail cell, and I was kind of banging around, but I could not get out of it. So
Mhm.
that's really the thought. I was complacent. I didn't feel like I could express who I was and what I wanted to do, because it was kind of one of those things like, don't say that, because that's, wait a minute, you want to write a children's book, or wait a minute, you want to do this or that. Like, I was like, what is this? Most people they're going to their job 9 to 5, and they're, collecting their paycheck so they can get to retirement. Like, that's what you have to do. Stop trying to think different.
Mhm.
So that's how I used to be. And once I embraced, again, going back to what I mentioned a minute ago, once I embraced no, dude, like, be who you are and enjoy life. Life's a short bus ride, go ahead and enjoy it. And you're going to be happier. And sure enough, it turned out that actually turned out to be true.
That's awesome. So how do you define happiness? What does happiness mean to you?
Happiness to me, probably the easiest way, and that can go in a few different, I guess, categories, but it's really the freedom to make choices.
Mhm.
Um, if I'm able to say, hey, I want to be on this podcast with Pamela, like that's a choice I make. I think of think of all the choices we make throughout every single day, right? Do we get the chance to make that choice, or is someone else making that choice? Brian, you have to be at this meeting at this time, or you have to do this or that. So we certainly can go into a variety of categories and talk about happiness, and everyone's going to have, it's kind of like the same thing of like, if you ask what's success mean, right? That's different to everyone.
Yep. Mhm.
So happiness, at least for me, it's just the freedom to make choices that I want to make, that make me happy, or make me at least kind of are going in the direction of where I want to be, and not having other people always make the choices for me. Because I look back at my life, like a lot of times it was like, well, I have to go to this job at this time, or I have to do these things that people are telling me, because I didn't set myself up properly to be able to make that choice myself, if that
Mhm.
makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's exactly what this spiritual journey is. It's a journey from, turning the unconscious into conscious. So making conscious choices that are aligned with who we are in the direction that we want to take our future. And
Yeah,
that's a very empowered place of living, right? As compared to, living in a very reactive or passive state. When we can really harness our personal power and make those choices that feel aligned for ourselves, and get rid of the fear and the doubt and the fear of judgment and all of that along the way, that's when we can really, like you said, break out of that constrained place and live in a space of freedom.
absolutely. I mean, how would you, if I threw it back at you, how do you define it? Do you define
Yeah,
it
very much
similarly?
the same. It really is. I am really absolutely all about choices. It's all
Yeah,
about making conscious, empowered choices. And it
yeah,
really is, again, it has freedom woven in there too, right? Freedom of time, freedom of, just being who you are. I mean, that's what happiness is to me, is releasing expectations and just really living in the moment. I find that, I think that we're all conditioned to be on this kind of this wild goose chase where we spend our lives trying to paint this picture of what we think a happy life should look like. I know I did, guilty as charged. I started off there. I went through all the kind of the whole checklist of things I thought I should be doing. And, when you finally check that last box, when I built that, multi-million dollar custom house with every single detail appointed, like thinking that was going to be the magic bullet. That was what's going to be what truly fulfilled me, and it
yeah.
really didn't, then that can be a really low place. So I kind of went through those motions, but then I realized that that happiness comes from within. And so if we are constantly trying to fulfill this image, paint this image of what we think a happy life is, that's never going to lead to true happiness and fulfillment. Instead, I define it as, a happy life is nothing more than a series of happy moments. It's just a string of happy moments along the way. So in my mind, it's really just an exercise of optimization, right? So how
Yeah,
do I optimize every single moment, every single experience? And
yeah.
that goes, how can I optimize this interview, this conversation with you, just by being present and really having empathy and compassion and really trying to step into your human experience and see this through your lenses. If I'm, decide to have chocolate, am I going to have, how do I optimize that? The way I optimize that is, instead of having M&Ms, I'm going to have a Godiva, you know, chocolate bar, because that to me is like, that's the way that I can make it the best possible moment. So, and that's what I think, I think the recipe for a happy life.
Yeah, and you mentioned something there, if I could underscore, is around what I'm thinking, or the way you said it was about the house and the custom build and all that, is really, that was a goal, right? That was like this is on my list. And that's why I talk about this a lot, is around, and listen, at the end of the day, I set goals. I think goals are good 1-ish years out, maybe 2 max, in my opinion. I'm big on the North Star. That's what I call it. Is I want the North Star in the distance. I never actually reach it, but the decisions I make are lining me up to go forward. Again, going back to the podcast or the children's books or the coaching or anything like that. I didn't say I was going to do those a few years ago, maybe. But because of decisions I made to go toward that North Star and being a navigator and wanting to help people on their journey, that led me down that path. So because I feel a lot of folks are like, no, I'm going to be a CEO in 5 years at this type of company. And it's like, well, to your point, what if you get there? Then what? Well, you set a new goal. Well, what's bigger than, it's just like, we're always trying to continue to go to the next summit and the next summit versus continuing just, progressing forward. So I don't know, it's just a different thought process that changed for me a few years back, about goal setting versus actually the North Star. And that was a big difference for me in terms of how I look at life.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And we speak the same language there because I think we do have to be very careful with goal setting. In my book, I talk about in the chapter of manifestation, I talk about the difference between goal setting and manifesting. And manifesting is obviously, as you know, like all about energy, and it's about following that North Star. And there's energy, there's an underlying energetic component as opposed to goals being very rigid and sort of one-dimensional in a way, where we set a goal and we work towards it, and like you said, and then what? So, I found that the best thing to do, the best place to be is mainly satisfied, like mostly satisfied with where we are, but we're constantly reaching for that next thing. And that, I think, is the recipe that kind of keeps us moving, keeps us, with having that drive.
Yeah. And congrats on the book, by the way. I talk about a lot of people that are like, I'm going to write my book someday, and they never start. So the fact that you started it and you got it launched, congrats on that. So how's that going? How's everything going, by the way, with it?
Good. Yeah, it's out there on Amazon, and I launched it actually right before the pandemic. So I did have, plans/visions of doing like public speaking right after I launched it, but obviously the universe had different plans. But I found a different group actually, which I very much love. So the book is out there, and I do use it as a basis for my coaching and my teaching. But yeah, the whole like goal setting manifestation, and that's, I think, a really important distinction. And and like you said, I think when we lock ourselves into goals, then we become so fixated on that, and we don't give the universe the license to be creative and the license to surprise us. And that's really when the magic happens. And I think we have to be careful to not force ourselves into a particular goal, because we're constantly growing and evolving, right? So it very well may be the case that by the time we reach that goal, that isn't what fulfills us anymore. So I believe that we have to constantly, like you said, just have that North Star that sort of guides us off in the distance, and allow the universe to surprise us, and give ourselves the space and the license to act on those intuitive hits, that creative energy when we get it.
Yeah. Well, it's a great point, because even with goals, as you might agree, is that we kind of can, if we know what the goal is, like for instance, I want to make X amount of dollars, or let's use something that's, kind of out there in the world a lot, is let's use a fitness example. Hey, I want to lose 20 pounds. Well, you can hack your way to lose 20 pounds. Now, it doesn't mean it's going to be healthy for you. It doesn't mean it's going to live for a long time after that, but you can get there to say, hey, I got 20 pounds less. Instead of thinking of it different as, hey, I'm in this journey to make better choices. Like you're saying with the chocolate, make better choices and set myself up to have better nutrition in my life, or, being consistent with a routine to maybe work out, stuff like that. Ultimately, you might lose 20, but maybe you end up losing 15, or maybe you end up keeping the same weight, but you change your whole body tone, right? And you feel better, and you're more. And so I think having like a number in mind, that's why I always use like the fitness example, is having that number in mind. Yeah, that's a goal, but how are you getting to that goal? Because you can certainly do some damage by getting to that goal as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's really, I think, what people don't really realize, but it's actually a feeling that we're after, but we don't necessarily articulate the goal based on emotions and feelings, right? We articulate the goal based on egoic barometers. Like you said, lose 20 pounds, or I want to be CEO, or I want to have the corner office, or I want to have the big house. Those are all egoic barometers. And based on my experience, never has anyone in the history of setting, basing their happiness and fulfillment on egoic barometers actually found happiness and fulfillment. True, long lasting, sustainable happiness and fulfillment. It's always found when we refocus on soul-based initiatives. And
Yeah.
so what I found is like all of those goals, everything else is taken care of when we focus on the right things. Like we were saying, focus on how do you show up in the world? How are you showing up in serving? How are you helping people? How are you being a kind person?
Yeah. This is actually funny. And I'll say one more thing on this. And I don't know if any of your listeners, if they, whether they like Joe Rogan or listen to his podcast or not, I think it's incredible. I think he has some incredible guests, but I would encourage everyone, go listen to the podcast he just launched last week with Jewel. Everyone knows Jewel, the recording artist. She has one of the most incredible stories I've ever heard in my life. But she actually talks in there. What we're talking about right now is, she was going to get an advance, I think, of $1 million with her first album. And she actually decided to say no and take money on the back end, which ended up, she made like 10x more because of it. But it was a decision she made where she didn't want the money to influence how she made choices. She wanted her inner happiness to make the choices, somewhere along those lines. So that's actually one I'd encourage folks to listen in. I think they might get a value out of that episode, similar to what we're talking about today. Being able to make those choices leading toward happiness, and ultimately making it a long-term decision versus that short win that sometimes we tend to do.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. I'll have to check that out too.
Yeah.
What I'd love to dive into next is what we were talking about before we jumped on, and that is this whole idea of transformation, the before and the after, and how nobody really talks about, the suck in the middle.
Yeah.
So would love to hear you reflect on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is a journey because, and you could take any point, right? Okay, the Brian of, we're in 2021. Do we go back to the Brian of 2015 or the Brian of 2010 or 2005, right? Totally different people at those different stages. But yeah, I think part of it is just learning that. And this is, by the way, it's something I still work on all the time. So I don't have it figured out, is just the awareness of where am I at? And where have I come from? What have I learned? And then where do I want to go? And being okay with where I'm at. Again, this is something I've struggled with a lot of, like, you see all these other folks of, oh, they're further ahead or they've done this or that. And trying to stay patient in the moment and saying, listen, dude, you're doing all right. You're living it makes you happy. You're progressing forward. You're doing things ethically. Be happy with that. And that's I don't know about you, but that's a continual struggle for me, to keep staying in the present moment. So I think the before and after is something, it just depends on what point of time. But one of the nice thing is when you do look back, I look back to, 10 years ago, I'm in $60,000 of debt, student loans and car payments and credit card debt and all this stuff. It didn't take overnight to be able to go debt free and now in a really good position from being able to invest or do other things. Mm-hmm. That wasn't like, oh, there's a snap of the fingers and all of a sudden that goes away. But like, those are things where I look back on and say, no, Brian, what you did was you made really good choices over a long period of time. Mm-hmm. And because you were leading in the direction, again, of my North Star. I don't need the fancy house, or I don't need the nice cars, or I'm kind of a minimalist as it is. So that helped me when you start making, more, and everyone probably can relate to this, as you get older, right? Maybe you make more money. You don't have to spend all that money, right? Mm-hmm. You can ultimately do some things to invest and save and give back and stuff like that. So that's one example of just like that before and after, where you don't see it when you're in it sometimes, but looking back, you can kind of connect those dots and say, wow, okay, this was a long period of time, but man, you got to a place where now you have some of those freedoms that we talked about earlier. So,
mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. And, like you mentioned too, just staying consistent, just, it was a accumulation of, or the result of doing the right things or making the right choices over a long period of time. And I think sometimes it's hard to kind of stay the course, but I found that just being consistent is such a big piece of it, because it's easy to be consistent for a little while and then just doubt starts to creep in, or different fears start to creep in, or you start to question, right? Start to wonder, like, is this really the right thing for me? Because we might not be seeing results quite yet, but it's super important just to stay consistent.
And I think one of the things too that I've realized is that you don't have to hit a home run every day. Just a little, we'll use a baseball analogy since the World Series is going on right now. It's like a little bunt single, just get something out there. So, so this is actually something I talked with a friend about yesterday was like, he's like, hey, I want to write this book and hasn't had the time. He travels a lot and stuff. I said, I don't know, write 100 words a day, 200 words a day, like do something small, even if it's really small. But if you wrote 100 words a day or 200 words a day, and you did that for the next year, how many words are you going to have? I can't do the math that good in my head right now, but just imagine how many words you would have to write if you just did that. But we all think in big chunks of like, oh my gosh, I got to write 100,000 words for this book. I'm never going to do that. But it's the same thing, we were talking about a little bit with the podcast and stuff before, is like with, all the episodes you have and I have with mine and stuff like that, is you had to start with number one. Right. And then you had to have number two and then number three. You don't get to 200 overnight. So it's a matter of putting one foot in front of the other and keeping it really simple. And this is something, again, I talk a lot about, and I probably go in too many tangents with, is we don't have to solve the world's problems tomorrow, but do one incremental move forward, do something small. And then ultimately you start building that habit, because that's the big thing. The consistency comes from good habits and better routines, right? So sometimes you can't do it for 2 hours a day. You can't work out. Great. Go run around the block. Maybe start there,
Right. And I know you're all about, your mantra is just get started, right? Like wherever you are, just get started. So what are some of the ways that you can coax people or coach them into that space of just getting started when they might be, they might be held back by fear or doubt?
Well, so a couple of things, and again, rein me in if I go down the rabbit hole. The fear is made up. Really, it's made up. We make it up in our heads. Seneca, the great Stoic philosopher, one of the quotes I love the most is, "We suffer more in imagination than in reality." Right? It's in our head.
Yeah.
We worry. We worry about stuff that hasn't even happened yet. So I would say one of the biggest things from like an actionable item is figuring out, and everyone's a little different with this, is going from, I want to make a change, right? So let's give a real life example, right? I want to start working out. I don't work out enough. I want to start working out. Going from saying, I want to start working out, to committing to working out. So what does that look like? Well, that says, I'm going to start getting up at 7 a.m. instead of 7:30, and I'm going to go run around the block. Or that says, hey, I'm going to sign up get a personal trainer. I was talking with my mentor about this the other day, where he has a personal trainer because he needs that kind of dangle of the carrot, if you will, to show up, which is fine because he gets busy with stuff. So those are the type of things where it's like figuring out, how do we go from making the hey, you know what, I want to work out, to actually committing to it. And all that really is making a decision on how you reprioritize your life. One of the exercises I work with a lot of folks on is, take a list right now, and everyone can do this, right? Rate 5 to 7 things, number it 1 through 7. I don't know why I could use 5. I like 7. It seems like an odd number. It is an odd number, I guess, but write down your 7 top priorities in life. What are those? Right? What are those? So for me, as an example, my son, I have a 9-year-old, he's number 1, right? Nothing's going to top that. And then right after that, I have sleep, I have nutrition, I have fitness, and technically the way I do it is sleep is second, and then nutrition / fitness is kind of on the same level, if you will. And then down below that, I have, obviously a few other things, like being able to do some of the different things I enjoy with my Just Get Started platform and stuff like that. But anyways, the reason I do that is it helps me make better decisions. So for instance, if I have friends that are going out, let's say tonight, and they're like, hey, Brian, we're going to go downtown, or we're going to do whatever. Not that I really go downtown in here anymore, but let's say they're doing that. And I know, wow, it's going to be a late night. Not that I won't do that at times, but I also say, gosh, you know what? Sleep is so important. I got to get my 8 to 8.5 hours, or I'm going to be fried tomorrow morning. I may decide not to go down purely because my priority actually is higher, is the sleep. And then maybe it's going to be, I'm going to do CrossFit tomorrow morning or something. So those priorities take precedent. And I think what happens a lot of times is the priority lists don't align. So for instance, the example I use a lot is, if we decide to say, hey, I want to watch Netflix for 3 hours tonight. But then again, what's on the other side? Well, I want to write a book. Well, what comes first? What's the higher priority? Well, if it's always, I really want to write this book, I think it could be impactful for a lot of people, then it might be, I'm going to write this book for 15 minutes first, then I'm going to go watch Netflix.
Yeah.
Right. So I think getting the priority list in check could really be helpful for folks, because until I actually thought about that, I was prioritizing things above others that weren't as important. And ultimately, when I flipped the script on that, it was like, wow, okay, I'm making better choices because of it. Is that helpful? I don't know if that is helpful or not, but.
Oh yeah, 100%. And it really highlights, again, just making conscious choices, right? Because you're constantly, checking back, you're anchoring on your values, your priorities. And that's an exemplification of making conscious choices, as opposed to just having knee-jerk reaction to the events of life, right? Like my buddies asked me if I want to go out. So now I'm being pulled this way and now I'm being pulled that way. I mean, that's a reactionary life, right? And when we're constantly, when the vast majority of our energy, our vibration is dependent upon reactions, right? When it's based on reactionary things, then that makes for a very chaotic world, right? Because you're getting pulled in a million different directions, as compared to living in the space of alignment, right? Alignment with who you are and your authenticity, and you're living from that connection of source energy, your inner being, staying anchored on, like, what is my North Star? I mean, that's a very peaceful, empowered, joyful, high vibrational state of living.
Yeah. And it goes back to what so let's use sleep as the example. Sleep obviously is very important to me. And it took me a lot of years to realize, like, hey, sleep is actually, this is great. Like, if I sleep better, I have more energy and I feel better and I'm happier and all this stuff. So as an example, like, I struggled for a lot of years sleeping. Now, part of that was financial troubles. Part of that was, marriage wasn't going well, stuff like that. There was a lot of, obviously, personal challenges. But what I realized was, well, what are some of the things that I'm doing prior to bed that maybe aren't setting me up for success, for a successful sleep? So through a lot of different research, I read the book and listened to a lot with Dr. Matthew Walker. He has a book, Why We Sleep, I think is absolutely phenomenal for everyone, eye-opening to me of all the different things. So I put together it's probably been 2 years now, a bedtime routine. So pretty much almost every single night, besides the one-off I travel or something like that, between 10 and 10:30 every night, phones away. I journal. And I just started doing a new type of journal I put together recently, but I'll journal it takes me about 5-ish minutes only. And then I read for anywhere between, it just depends how I feel, 10 to 20 minutes. And then I shut down everything, lights off, and generally between 10:30 and 11, I'm asleep, or I'm going to sleep. What I've noticed with that is, now there's still the nights, my head, I don't know about yours, my head just, sometimes the ideas just flow through and I got a lot of crap in there. But most nights I fall right asleep and I sleep through the night. And what I realized was that setting myself up for success in those 30-ish, 45 minutes prior to bed helped me sleep better. So it's not just as like, I want to sleep better. What are the things I'm changing in my life, or I can change over time? So again, anyone out there, whether you struggle with sleep or something else, my encouragement is to slowly put new things into play. Again, this doesn't have to be a rip the Band-Aid off. One small, thing goes to the next. So if we use the sleep example, maybe it's, I'm going to read 5 minutes before bed. Instead of being on my phone or having my TV on, I'm going to read 5 minutes before bed. And then maybe you move that to 10 minutes. Or maybe for you, it's, hey, I'm going to sit and close my eyes and think for 10 minutes, like whatever it is, everyone's different. But you got to find what works for you, but you have to start trying and testing and tasting some of those things and seeing what works and what doesn't. And ultimately, create some new routines, which I'm big on, creating routines, which I never used to be like that. But I've seen a difference in a lot of parts of my life for sure.
Yeah, I would agree. And I would wholeheartedly echo that. I have a lot of, routines in place that are constantly changing. I don't believe in any, cookie cutter type style routines. I think the joy is really in the journey, right? It's in discovering, right? What works for you. So, maybe you want to read, like you said, for 5 minutes or read for 10 minutes or whatever. I mean, that's the fun part, is discovering it, discovering, what works for you along the way. So I highly advocate for routines, morning routines, evening routines. Anytime you can put structures and processes and procedures in place that allows you to free up your mental space and your creative energy and save it for other things. Because we all deal with, sometimes we don't even realize it, but decision making fatigue. We're encountered with several decisions over the course of the day. And if we constantly have to think about every single thing that we do, then that it takes away a lot of creative energy from other areas. So
Yeah.
anytime we can put those routines and processes into place, it can help us out and help us gain a lot of momentum.
It's a great point. And one of the things I love, Tim Ferriss talks about a lot is, a decision that basically solves 1,000 decisions kind of, I'm paraphrasing here, but being able to, like, again, using the example of this is a priority, or, hey, I do this before bed, or this is my morning routine, or whatever it is, or I block X amount, I block from 12 to 1 every day to do X. I'm making that up, whatever that is. Well, if something comes up, hey, I need you here at 12:15. Well, if nope, I never do that because 12 to 1's this, you don't have to worry about making the decision. The decision's already made.
Yeah.
So I think being able to help, basically we can help ourselves by just creating these paths for us that are easier versus always having to be like, oh, should I do that? Well, no, if you never do X, whatever that is, if you never go, let's say go out on a Friday night, well, then if someone asks you to go out Friday night, you say no. It's a
Mm-hmm.
simple answer, right?
Yeah.
So like that's maybe not that's maybe a dumb thought, but just in general, like those type of things is create some pathways for yourself to be able to make easier decisions and make sure you stick with your routines.
Yeah.
Because ultimately, if we're always trying to jump around, we're never going to have those habits form.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. And this is all in the spirit of honoring ourselves, right? I think oftentimes we don't want to say no, or we don't know how to say no. But if we're saying yes to someone or something else, we're also at the same time saying no to ourselves. Right. And so we have to learn to say no and be okay with that. And not feel like we have to be, saying yes all the time and putting other people's priorities first, because again, that's a state of being that's very reactive and really takes us out of alignment. So
Yeah.
I've gotten to a place. I used to put my kids first all the time, 100% of the time. I was totally like the mom running around like stressed and overwhelmed and hair in a ponytail and no makeup. I joke that I used to look like those moms on, that they target on those makeover shows. Like, we totally want to work with her. And so I was putting myself last all the time, but that has an expiration date. That model doesn't work for very long. But really honoring ourselves is the most important thing we can do every day. So, like you said, if it's time that we set aside, then honor ourselves and stick to it. We wouldn't just bow out of an appointment that we had with somebody at the last minute if something else came up. No. So, I mean, I think that we should do that for ourselves too. Hold
Yeah.
that time as sacred, and honor it, and prioritize ourselves first, because I found that when we follow that model, then we have more to give to other people. When we're constantly running on empty, how
Yeah.
much value are we really going to be bringing when we're showing up worried and stressed and in kind of fear mode, right? if
Yeah.
we if we come at life from an empowered place and peaceful and we're aligned, etc., then we're going to be in a position to serve everyone in our lives in a better way.
Yeah. And I want to mention something you just brought up, which is actually really interesting. And folks listening may or may not have kids. So I'm divorced, right? So I have, and my ex and I, we have, joint custody. So it's every other week I have my son. Okay. So the weeks I don't have them, my priorities are different, right? Because I can focus more on all the different things I'd like to get done when he's with me. Again, he's right up there. Number one. So the reason I mention that is everyone's different. So as much as we can, someone can look at you or me or someone else It's, you really got to look at your own situation and figure out what works for me, and be okay with that, and not say like, well, I don't want to do this because so-and-so said this is not the best thing. Who cares what other people say? Again, this goes back to living authentically, what you mentioned at the beginning. It's like, who do you want to be? What do you want to instill? And by the way, how many kids do you have? Can I ask?
4.
Oh my gosh. Okay. So four is a lot different than one. But as you probably are aware, right, as kids grow up, and I don't know why we don't realize this, I'm kind of really in the present moment of this, is the kids start taking on how the parents act. So if the parents don't eat healthy, if they're not trustworthy, if they're not honest, if they're not whatever, the kids are going to start being like that. So instead of looking at our kids and saying, well, you shouldn't do this or shouldn't do that, I've done this the last few years, is really look in the mirror hard and be like, where can I improve as a person even more? And where can I instill that to my child? Because ultimately, he's only going to be around the people that he's around, and he's going to think that's the way you should act.
Mm-hmm.
And I look at this, obviously growing up with my parents, and I always give my parents grief, but I mean, they were good parents. They knew what they knew. I grew up in a small town in New York. Like, they knew what they knew. So as the years go on, I have more respect for, listen, they did the best they could. Mm-hmm. So I look at it again, going back to my son and saying, okay, how do I make better decisions ultimately so that he's learning the right things? Because mm-hmm. that's really what he's going to, through osmosis, if you will, take with him in his life. I don't know if you agree with that or had similar thoughts as you raise your kids.
Oh yeah, 100%. And one of the things that my parents used to always say when I was growing up that it still resonates with me today, and I try to live by it, is, values are caught by kids. They're not taught to kids. And so that really, stuck with me. And I try to embody that in my parenting, just knowing that, what I model for them is what they're going to be taking on. That's what they're going to be patterning their lives after. They're looking at different behaviors, et cetera. So, and you know what, I'm not perfect. I strive for that. And I really think there is something to be said for being vulnerable too. And I've said to my kids before, like, you guys, like, this is really hard, if I'm trying to figure out driving or, challenging 4 kids, it can get kind of dicey sometimes. And, I've said to them before, like, I don't have this all figured out 100%. I'm still learning as I go. So I'm going to need you guys to cut me a little slack here, or give me your ideas, or help me with, by giving me reminders of who needs to be driven where. And it's amazing what can happen, the huge energy shift that can happen when you do step into that vulnerable space.
Well, and one of the things too, talking about kind of living authentically, is I've really tried to do this, and I'm probably failing miserably at times, but I try my best, is that I don't have all the answers. As much as adults think, because we're a certain age and we've gone through all this stuff, that, and I see this a lot, is like, and again, maybe growing up with this too, is like talking down to kids and saying, nope, you need to do this or that or whatever. I've really, and this is hard, trust me, because it's ingrained, I think, in me, is really like with my son trying to, actually this morning, trying to get him ready for school. And I've put together this morning routine for him to kind of get through the checklist, because he is all over the place. But, he's like, well, I'm going to do this or this. And I said, hey, bud, I was like, you have your checklist. I trust you're going to do it. Okay. And sure enough, what's interesting is, and I, downstairs, I'm doing my kind of, morning practice that I do. And he's upstairs and I can kind of hear him. He was fighting me, he went and he kind of went through the checklist and he did his stuff. And one of the things that continues to teach me is that he's a smart boy. And I just need to let him be him. He wants to live authentically. He wants to do his thing. If I try to put him in that same box that I was put in, how is he going to develop? So it's really been important for me to kind of let him do his thing. Certainly, if he's doing things that are unethical or he's being mean or stuff like that, I got to teach those things. But this is something actually great I learned from, who Neil deGrasse Tyson is?
I don't.
He's a astrophysicist. He's out there in the world a lot. I definitely recommend folks to check him out. But something I heard from him, this is many years ago, my son was probably 2 or 3, and it really helped me out from a parenting, is he said, all kids are the fire almost gets put out by the parents, where they're, think about it, like your kids, if they spill something, what's the first thing we do? We yell at them, like, oh, why did you spill that? Whatever. And that was something I used to do. And what I learned from Neil was that, no, the kids are silent. Let them explore a little bit. So as much as I want to jump on it, step back and see what happens. And what's interesting, if you do that, maybe folks listening out there, maybe try this with your kids the next few times, see what happens with their brains, how they start. All they're really trying to do with, like, when something spills, whatever, they're trying to figure out what happens, like when water overflows, like, why does that do that? All this stuff we learn in nature growing up, 500,000 years ago, where we didn't have all these technologies up, we just did whatever happened. For some reason now it's like, nope, this is what you have to do. Don't spill this or do this perfect. Why? The only way they're going to go through stuff and learn is by making mistakes and trying and testing, tasting, like I mentioned earlier. So anyways, that's something really cool. When we talk about like living authentically, I try to do that with my son as well, and just let him, again, there's some barriers. I'm not saying he just runs rampant, but really let him kind of do his thing. And it's amazing how the creativity starts to form,
Yeah, it's so true. And I've had that experience too, as I was listening to you talk. I try to do that with my kids too, just celebrate their uniqueness. Yeah. And I remember one time my son, John, was, I don't know, he was like 3 or 4, and he's my mischievous one. He's like right there in the middle and constantly like, just always, we used to call him Curious George. Like he was constantly just always getting into stuff. And finally I was just at wit's end one day. I'm like, John, I'm like, why do you keep doing all this stuff? He's like, I just like to make people laugh. And like from that moment, I saw him differently than I had before. I saw him through different lenses. I'm like, yeah, like he really is tapped into this. He believes that this is part of what he is here to do, is make people laugh. And he's like my funny kid. I mean, they're all pretty funny, but he especially has this like sense of humor, and he is like a little bit of a class clown, but just kind of gets it in right under the radar. So he just has this really cool, sense of humor, and this, just propensity just for being a natural kind of comedian kind of thing. And once I, again, like celebrated that, became aware of that and celebrated that, it really unlocked a whole different aspect of him.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah. And it's so interesting because you almost have like, if we're aware enough, that it kind of like a little experiment going on with each kid. You have 4, I only can see 1, but like the experiment of like, yeah, if they do this, how does that affect that? And you can kind of start seeing like, okay, if I try to do this where we have no screen time a lot of the time, but it's like, okay, what happens if I take the iPad away? What does he do? Where will he go? Oh, he actually likes to, like, this happens. I'm just thinking, sorry, I'm going on random tangents here, but I think it's fun is like, I'll, you get cardboard, you think, you get Amazon packages, whatever. Yeah. Well, anytime I try to like recycle those, and he's like, well, hold on a second. Let me keep those. And what he'll do is like, he'll build random, like he's build like battleships and all this stuff. You'll want like duct tape. And again, if I was just like, nope, throwing those away, I might, whatever, but hey, go, yeah, let me see what happens here. What's and I kind of take that approach of, and this is kind of how I live a lot of my life now anyways, is like, what's the worst that happened? As long as I'm making, this goes back to the decisions that are, again, in my ethical view, good, and they're good for the world. What's the worst that happens? Like, why have that fear anymore? Because who cares if something, if this conversation here, this is who I am. Again, if we met in a coffee shop, this is how I'm talking. Versus years ago, I remember someone, so I obviously have been, enterprise sales. I've been in sales for a long time. And I remember, and I've always kind of been like this, although I think I've opened up a lot more over the last 10 or 12 years. But I had one of my friends that I actually went to college with, we were working together. And, I'm just like this in conversation. And then I go on a demo with a potential client. This is probably 7, 8 years ago now. And we go on the demo and have it. And I said, hey, what did you think about that call? Because he was listening to it. He's like, you're not monotone. Why were you so monotone on that meeting? Because we get this thought in our head, because this is how I thought you had to be in sales. You had to like have this certain professional, whatever. And from that moment on, I was like, no, I'm just going to be myself. Mm-hmm. So literally, like when I'm working with potential clients or current clients, something like that, this is actually how I talk. I'm like, why am I trying to be someone I'm not? And
Yeah.
ultimately, again, going back to that living authentically, like if we just lean into that a little bit and we say, you know what, I'm going to be myself, people might think it's different, but it's going to attract people that want me to be successful, that trust me, that
Right.
see that I'm being a good person. Ultimately, I'm going to start building a better circle for myself anyways. So the people that
Mhm.
are like, Brian, you're being weird, that's different, maybe they're not the best people for me anyways, you know?
Right. Right. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. You definitely feel freer when you live in that space to just be yourself. And
Sure, absolutely.
yeah, probably, and I'm sure get better results too in your profession because you're showing up more authentically. You're showing up with different energy.
Yeah. Well, one of the things I learned I can't remember who taught me this, but I learned was like, like I don't lie, as an example.
Hmm.
And the reason, and someone said this, I must have been in my teenage years when I heard it, was like, well, when you lie, you have to remember your lies
Yeah.
and you have to remember what they were. So from that moment on, well, listen, I probably, my son still thinks Santa exists. So not that I don't tell, there's not, that, but in terms of like lying, because I'm like, no, I'd rather just be direct and honest.
Yeah.
And it is what it is. Like, this is just
Right.
how I am. And I
Right.
don't have to remember stories or whatever. It's true stories, so
Right.
it's,
Right.
anyways, that's something, again, just kind of thinking about, of going back to that living authentically. It's just like, just be yourself and trust what you want to do. And if you want to do whatever, like I want to write books and I want to blog and coach people and podcast and do all these other things, well, then I'm going to do those. And I'm not going to say no because the world may not want it. I'm not going to do it. Well, we don't know what the world wants, right?
Right.
No
Right.
one, no one knew that, Harry Potter should be out there. Well, when it came out, then now everyone loves Harry Potter. It's like, you got to put
Right.
it out in the world, and
Right.
then you see what happens.
Yeah. Yeah. Love that.
Yeah.
Love that. Well, I just noticed our time. We are closing in on the end of our episode.
Yeah.
I've loved our conversation, but I wanted to give you another minute or two just to talk about. I'll just open it up to you, carte blanche. You can talk about anything you would like to, more specifically what you do or any closing words of wisdom.
Well, I just always encourage people to, like I said, because I've been through this in my own journey. Everyone has stuff with their life. Listen, no one's perfect. No life is perfect, but is what we talked about earlier, going through happiness, is just continue to audit yourself as best as you can and figure out what things make you happy. And sometimes they're not the things you think you should be doing, right? As I mentioned some stuff earlier, like if you want to write a book, I'll go back to that because I know we both written books. It's like, if you want to write a book and you're like, God, that feels weird when I say that to my friends or family, it doesn't matter. It's, what do you want to do inside? So I encourage everyone just to think about, how do I want to get to the next step and the next step and the next after that? Well, I have to start today, and I have to start doing things that make me more authentic. Going back to your initial question, if we go back to that again, well, how do I do that? Well, I have to just trust in whatever's inside, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm a big believer that you only discover happiness once you discover yourself. So in happiness, we can say, oh, if I get that custom built house, right? Yeah, but you have to do, what's inside? What do you really want? What does the house give you, maybe? Right? I don't know what the house, maybe I'll put you on the spot there. I don't know what the house gave you, right? Maybe it gave you a sense of security or success or something. Okay, well, let's explore that a little bit further. And when I explore that further, well, maybe there's other things that I could do that get me that same feeling. Maybe I
Mm-hmm.
don't need the house, right?
Right.
Maybe, again, maybe it could be, hey, I want to start a podcast, and maybe that gets me the fulfillment because it builds a community. Because really what I wanted to be in a great community that felt safe, and there were a lot of kids there, for my kids to play with. Okay, well, maybe I can create a different community and I can do it in a different way. So I think the exploring ourselves and what we really want, I know it's something, from personal experience, has been important for me and has shaped my life in a different way that, I ever thought possible. So
Yeah. Well said. Well said. Thank
yeah.
you. And so if people would like to get in contact with you directly, what is the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, probably my website, brianondrako.com. So I'll spell it out. It's BrianOndrako.com. Again, we talked about it briefly, but I have my Just Get Started podcast. Whenever this launches, I don't know, but at end of November 2021, I'll be 4 years doing the podcast. over 200 episodes at that point. I'm almost at 200 right now in terms of interviews. And yeah, I got my books on there. I have my second children's book coming out early 2022. For folks that enjoy encouragement or, just need a kind of a spark of inspiration, I blog 3 times a week. You can subscribe to that. It goes right to your inbox on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday morning. So just say hello, folks that just want to catch up on a quick call and just chat. I enjoy doing that as well. So
Awesome. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being on my show today. I so appreciate it.
yeah, Pamela, this was a lot of fun. Thanks for having me, and enjoyed the conversation immensely.
Yeah, likewise. Thank you. I look forward to staying in touch. And thank you to all of our viewers and listeners. I so appreciate you. And as you know by now, I believe that time is a choice. And I'm grateful that you have carved time out of your day to be here with Brian and myself to listen to everything that he's had to share. So thanks everyone, and have a great day and a great weekend. Bye.